There's a secret no spiritual teacher wants you to discover. Enlightenment is the greatest letdown you will ever experience. The moment the light finally breaks through, you may find yourself utterly underwhelmed. For what awaits beyond that threshold isn't cosmic fireworks or divine rapture, but a vast, ordinary emptiness that's been here all along. This void that follows awakening isn't failure. It's the cosmic punchline to the greatest joke ever played. You've been digging frantically for buried treasure your entire life, only to find that the chest contains nothing. And yet, paradoxically, this nothing is precisely what you've been seeking. What if everything you've been taught about spiritual awakening is backwards? What if the goal isn't to gain something extraordinary, but to finally recognize the extraordinary nature of what's already here? The truth, which both terrifies and liberates, is that the emptiness you've been running from is actually the freedom you've been running toward. You know, there's something absolutely hilarious about the spiritual journey that most people completely miss. The cosmic joke that's playing out right under our noses while we're busy being terribly serious about the whole affair. Here's how the joke unfolds. A person becomes convinced that there's something profoundly wrong with their existence. I am incomplete. They think I am not enlightened, not awakened, not realized, and so begins this tremendous effort. The meditation retreats, the fasting, the chanting, the reading of endless spiritual books, years of discipline and practice, all aimed at this glorious moment of liberation that surely awaits them. And then one day, perhaps sitting quietly, perhaps in the middle of brushing their teeth, something shifts. The bubble bursts, and what is revealed? Well, nothing special at all. Just what's always been here. And they laugh. They laugh because they suddenly realize they'd been like a fish swimming desperately in search of water. My goodness, they might say, I've been seeking myself, through myself, to find myself, and the very seeking was hiding what was never lost. It's as if you spent your life savings on an expedition to the North Pole to find ice, only to discover upon arrival that, surprise, ice is indeed cold and white. What a revelation. But here's the really delicious part of the joke. After this apparent awakening, after all that effort, all that striving, what happens next is often a profound letdown. Is this it? Becomes the haunting question. All that worked for this? You see, the ego expected to achieve something spectacular. It expected to become a superior spiritual being, radiating light from every pore, perhaps floating 6 inches above the ground. Instead, what it got was the ordinary world exactly as it's always been. The same old sounds, the same old sensations, the same old thoughts coming and going. And this, my friends, is the first shocking truth about awakening. It's utterly, devastatingly ordinary. The ego, expecting to gain something magnificent, instead loses its most cherished illusion that there was ever anything to gain in the first place. So the cosmic joke plays out. You climb the highest mountain only to discover that the treasure you sought was in your pocket all along. And as you stand there on the summit, part of you wants to cry at the absurdity of it all, while another part can't help but roar with laughter. Because what could be funnier than realizing that what you are, what you've always been, is precisely what you've been seeking? It's like spending your life searching for your glasses only to realize they've been on your head the entire time. The seeker is the sought. The explorer is the territory. And the joke ultimately is on you. But don't feel bad. We're all in on this cosmic prank together. And perhaps the ability to laugh at oneself when the joke is finally understood is the first sign that a genuine awakening has occurred. Now, let's talk about something that the glossy spiritual magazines won't tell you about. The absolutely terrifying void that often follows what we call awakening. You see, the Western mind has been conditioned to value fullness over emptiness, presence over absence, something over nothing. We are achievement-oriented beings, constantly adding to ourselves more knowledge, more experiences, more possessions, more status. Even in spirituality, we approach it with this same inquisitive mindset. I'll get enlightenment and add it to my collection of achievements. But what happens when awakening reveals not a new attainment, but a great emptiness? What happens when the solid ground you thought you were standing on suddenly dissolves beneath your feet? Let me tell you what happens. Panic ensues. Absolute existential panic, because suddenly you're face to face with the great void that Eastern philosophies have been pointing to for millennia, and it's not at all what your ego expected. This void isn't just empty of stuff, it's empty of you. That cherished sense of being a separate, enduring entity gone, the comforting boundaries between me and here and world out there dissolved. All your carefully constructed ideas about who you are and what life means, revealed as mere conceptual scaffolding with nothing at the center. And this is where it gets interesting, because the Western mind typically reacts to this void in one of two ways. Either it recoils in horror and quickly rebuilds the ego fortress. Well, that was an interesting experience, but now back to normal life. Or it tries to claim the void as a new spiritual possession. Look at me. I've experienced the void. I'm so spiritual. Both responses miss the point entirely. The void is not something to escape from, nor is it something to brag about. It's not an experience that comes and goes. It's the very context in which all experiences arise. It's not nothing in the sense of a negation. It's nothing in the sense that it's no thing, no object, no entity, no graspable content. It's the open space in which everything appears. Now, why does this terrify us so? Because we've spent our entire lives identifying with content, with thoughts, feelings, perceptions, roles, relationships, and suddenly we're confronted with the context instead. It's as if you've spent your life watching movies, completely absorbed in their stories, only to suddenly become aware of the screen itself. The screen isn't another movie. It's what makes all movies possible. And this brings us to the second shocking truth. What terrifies the ego is precisely what liberates consciousness. The void that seems so frightening is actually the freedom you've been seeking all along. But you can't possess this freedom. You can only be it. Think of it this way. You've been living in a tiny room your whole life, decorating it, rearranging the furniture, perhaps even expanding it a bit through spiritual practice. And then one day, the walls suddenly collapse, revealing the boundless sky. Of course, there's terror. Where's the security? Where's the boundary? Where's me? But as the initial shock subsides, you might notice something rather wonderful. You can breathe now. Really breathe. For the first time, there's space, infinite space. And in this space, life unfolds with an ease and spontaneity that was impossible in that little room. So if you've touched this void and it terrified you, congratulations. You're on the right track. The ego should be terrified because the void is its death. But what dies is not you, only the idea of you. And on the other side of that death lies a life of extraordinary depth and authenticity. I'll now continue with the next two chapters. Have you ever considered the peculiar assumption underlying our entire approach to spirituality? This curious idea that enlightenment is something to be achieved as if it were a diploma to be earned or a mountain peak to be conquered. I find this absolutely fascinating, because what does it mean to achieve something? It means to gain what you didn't previously have, to reach what was distant from you, to become what you are not. And herein lies the fundamental paradox of spiritual seeking. How can you achieve what you already are? Imagine a wave on the ocean spending its entire existence trying to become wet. If only I meditate long enough, practice hard enough, read enough books, then someday I'll achieve wetness. The very notion is absurd, isn't it? The wave is already wet through and through because it is water. Wetness is its intrinsic nature, not something to be attained. Yet this is precisely how most of us approach spirituality. We treat awakening as an achievement, a special state to be reached through effort and practice. We imagine that enlightenment is somehow separate from us, and that through diligent seeking we can close the gap and finally arrive at it. But here's the third shocking truth. There is no gap to close. There never was. The very idea of spiritual achievement is the primary obstacle to recognizing what's already here. You see, awakening isn't about adding something new to yourself. Quite the opposite. It's about stripping away the layers of illusion that make you believe you lack something essential. It's about recognizing that the treasure you've been seeking is what's been seeking all along. This is what the Zen masters were pointing to with all those maddening koans and paradoxes. When they ask what is your original face before your parents were born, they're not inviting you to achieve a new understanding. They are trying to short-circuit the very mechanism of achievement itself. They're pointing to what's already here, prior to all effort, all practice, all becoming. Now, I'm not suggesting that spiritual practices have no value. They do, but not in the way most people think. Meditation, contemplation, inquiry, these aren't techniques for attaining enlightenment. They are means of exhausting the illusion that enlightenment is something to be attained. It's rather like digging a hole in search of sky. You dig and dig, going deeper and deeper, and still no sky. Eventually, after enough digging, you might give up in frustration, and in that giving up, you finally look up and notice that the sky has been above you all along. It was never hidden. You were just looking in the wrong direction. This is why the greatest sages often speak of awakening as a recognition rather than an achievement. It's not about gaining something new, but about recognizing what's always been the case. Not about becoming something other than what you are, but about seeing through the illusion that you were ever anything else. And here's where it gets really interesting. After years of spiritual striving, what often precipitates awakening is not success, but failure. The utter collapse of the achievement-oriented approach, when all your efforts to become enlightened have failed, when you've exhausted every technique and practice, when you've completely given up on ever reaching that exalted state precisely, then in that moment of total surrender, you might notice that what you've been seeking has been here all along. So if you're still working hard to achieve enlightenment, I have news for you. You're barking up the wrong tree. Or rather, you are the tree. And the barking is just an entertaining distraction. The void after awakening isn't a new achievement. It's the spaciousness that remains when you finally stop trying to achieve anything at all. Now, let's tackle one of the most pervasive and damaging myths in the spiritual marketplace. This curious notion that awakening leads to permanent bliss. You know the images I'm talking about. Those serene spiritual teachers with their perpetual half-smiles apparently floating above the messiness of human existence in a state of uninterrupted ecstasy. Goodness me, what a load of nonsense. If there's one thing that creates more confusion and disappointment in spiritual seekers than anything else, it's this expectation that awakening will catapult you into a state of permanent, unchanging bliss, as if consciousness, which is fundamentally dynamic and ever-changing, could somehow freeze into a permanent state of any kind. Here's the fourth shocking truth. Awakening doesn't eliminate the full spectrum of human emotion. It liberates it. It doesn't trap you in bliss. It frees you to fully experience whatever arises without resistance, without identification, without the additional suffering that comes from believing things should be different. Let me explain. Prior to awakening, most of us are engaged in a constant battle with our experience. We cling desperately to pleasant states and push away unpleasant ones. We believe that happiness consists in having certain feelings and not others. And this very resistance to what is creates tremendous suffering. After awakening, it's not that you no longer feel sadness, anger, fear, or pain. These natural human emotions continue to arise in response to life circumstances. What changes is your relationship to them. They're no longer seen as problems to be solved or enemies to be vanquished. They are recognized as temporary waves on the ocean of consciousness, arising, playing out their patterns, and dissolving back into the void. You know, I've met quite a few supposedly enlightened teachers who present this facade of perpetual serenity as if they've somehow transcended the human condition. And I've always found it rather suspicious. It seems to me that they are not displaying enlightenment so much as a sophisticated form of repression, a spiritual bypassing that denies the fullness of human experience in favor of a carefully maintained mask of transcendence. Genuine awakening doesn't bypass anything. It doesn't replace the rich tapestry of human emotion with a flat, monotonous bliss. Rather, it allows every feeling to be felt more completely, more honestly, without the additional layer of resistance that turns natural emotion into persistent suffering. Think of it this way. Emotions are like weather patterns passing through the sky of consciousness. Before awakening, You're constantly trying to control the weather, trying to make it sunny all the time, and getting upset when it rains. After awakening, you recognize yourself as the sky, not the weather. The weather still comes and goes, but you're no longer identified with it. You're the open space in which all weather happens. This doesn't mean you're indifferent to the weather, far from it. You can fully appreciate the unique beauty of each passing cloud, each storm, each clear blue expanse, but you're no longer fighting against it, no longer believing that your nature depends on it. So, if you've had glimpses of awakening and you're wondering why you still feel the full range of human emotions, why you still get irritated in traffic or feel grief when a relationship ends, don't worry. That's not a sign that your awakening was incomplete or invalid. It's a sign that you're a fully alive human being experiencing life in all its richness and depth. The void after awakening isn't a void of feeling. It's the vast open space in which all feelings are free to arise and pass away without defining or limiting who you are. And there's a profound joy in this freedom. Not the temporary high of an ecstatic state, but the deep, abiding joy of being fully present with life, exactly as it is. What a peculiar situation we find ourselves in after glimpsing this void. Here we are, having sought firm ground for so long, only to discover that there isn't any. And now what? How does one live from this groundless place? This is where it gets really fascinating, you see. Because once the initial terror subsides, once you stop frantically grabbing for solid ground, you might notice something rather extraordinary. You haven't fallen. Though there's nothing supporting you, nothing solid to stand on, somehow you haven't crashed, you're floating, or rather, you're flying. The fifth shocking truth is this. The groundlessness that initially terrifies us is actually the foundation of an incredible lightness of being. When there's nothing solid to hold on to, you're free to dance. It's rather like learning to swim, isn't it? At first, the water seems like a dangerous element. You flail about desperately seeking something firm to grab, something solid to stand on. But the breakthrough in swimming comes precisely when you stop fighting the water, when you surrender to its fluid nature and discover that it will support you if you work with it rather than against it. The void is like that. It's not something to overcome or escape from. It's something to surrender to play with, to dance with. You might notice that there's a peculiar freedom in not knowing who you are. When you're no longer defined by a rigid self-concept, you are free to express yourself in ways that would have seemed impossible before. You can be serious without being solemn, playful without being frivolous, loving without being attached, passionate without being driven. The Zen masters speak of no mind or beginner's mind, that state of openness and possibility that exists before the solidifying effects of concept and judgment. This isn't a state of ignorance or confusion, but of profound innocent clarity. It's seeing the world without the distorting lens of preconception. And from this place of not knowing, of groundless presence, life takes on an extraordinary vividness and immediacy. Colors seem more vibrant, sounds more musical, textures more fascinating. It's as if a veil has been lifted, revealing the world as it actually is. Not the dull, familiar world you thought you knew, but an ever-fresh, ever-surprising dance of form and emptiness. You know, there's a wonderful Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. What this points to is that awakening doesn't transport you to some other realm. It transforms your relationship with this one. The same activities continue, but they're infused with a new quality of presence, a new appreciation for the miracle of the ordinary. Dancing with nothingness doesn't mean disappearing into some trance-like state of absorption. It means being fully here, fully engaged with life, but without the constricting sense of a separate self that needs to control, achieve, or become. It's a paradoxical state of effort without struggle, intention without tension, engagement without attachment. Think of a great jazz musician improvising. There's tremendous skill and knowledge involved, years of practice and discipline, and yet in the moment of creation, all of that falls away. The music simply flows through them, not from them. They are simultaneously the instrument and the player, the music and the silence from which it emerges. That's what it's like to dance with nothingness. You are not controlling life from some position outside it. You're allowing life to live itself through you as you. And in this allowing this surrender, there's an ecstatic freedom that makes even the most mundane moments shimmer with significance. So if you've touched the void and it frightened you, I invite you to look again. Perhaps what you took to be an abyss is actually an open sky. And perhaps what you need is not more solid ground, but the courage to spread your wings and fly. Now, here's something that the mystical traditions have recognized for centuries, but that our modern spiritual scene tends to overlook. The most profound awakening is not an escape from the ordinary mind, but a return to it. A return with new eyes, yes, but a return nonetheless. You know, there's this curious tendency among spiritual seekers to denigrate the ordinary and glorify the extraordinary. Ordinary consciousness is seen as something to transcend, to get beyond, while extraordinary states, visions, ecstasies, mystical experiences are treated as signs of spiritual progress. But what if the most extraordinary discovery is the sacredness of the ordinary itself? The sixth shocking truth is this: after all the fireworks of awakening experiences, the deepest realization is that ordinary mind with its thoughts, feelings, perceptions, is itself the Buddha mind. Not something to transcend, but something to recognize for what it truly is. This is what the great Zen master Dogen meant when he said, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? And it's what the Zen tradition points to in its emphasis on everyday activities, cooking, cleaning, gardening, as expressions of enlightened activity. You see, the great cosmic joke is that after all, you're seeking for some special transcendent state. You end up exactly where you started, chopping wood, carrying water, going about the business of ordinary life. But with one crucial difference: you now recognize that this ordinary life was what you were seeking all along. It's rather like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, isn't it? After all, her adventures in that magical realm, after seeking the wizard's help to get home, she discovers that she had the power to return home all along. That home was never actually lost, only unrecognized for the miracle it is. Now, I'm not suggesting that extraordinary experiences have no value. They can be important signposts along the way. Dramatic shifts in perspective that shake us out of our habitual patterns. But they're not the destination. They're more like doorways that, if we're fortunate, lead us back to the ordinary world with new eyes. Think of it this way. A child might be so entranced by a gorgeous sunset that they momentarily forget themselves, merge with the splendor, experience a kind of natural samadhi. But then the sun dips below the horizon and they return to their ordinary awareness. But now that ordinary awareness is infused with the beauty they've just witnessed. The extraordinary experience enriches the ordinary rather than replacing it. This return to ordinary mind doesn't mean returning to unconscious habitual living. Quite the opposite. It means bringing a new quality of consciousness of presence to the most mundane activities. It means discovering that washing dishes can be just as sacred as formal meditation. That a conversation with a friend can be just as profound as a mystical vision. The 12th century Chinese Zen master Hongzhi expressed it beautifully. The field of boundless emptiness is what exists from the very beginning. You must purify, cure, grind down, or brush away all the tendencies you have fabricated into apparent habits. Then you can reside in a clear circle of brightness. What he's pointing to is not some exotic state separate from ordinary mind, but the natural clarity that's revealed when the veils of concept and habit are removed. So, if you've had dramatic awakening experiences and now find yourself back in the seemingly mundane world of work, relationships, and daily chores, don't despair. You haven't lost anything. In fact, you are now perfectly positioned to discover what those experiences were pointing to all along. The extraordinary nature of the ordinary, the sacred dimension of everyday life. The void after awakening isn't empty in the sense of being a barren wasteland. It's empty in the sense of being free from our projections and expectations, allowing the inherent richness of ordinary experience to finally shine through. Let me share something that might be a bit uncomfortable to hear. One of the most insidious traps on the spiritual path, perhaps the most insidious, is what we might call the spiritual ego. And it's particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as enlightenment. You see, the ordinary ego is fairly easy to spot. Its concerns are transparent. It wants comfort, status, control, pleasure, approval. But the spiritual ego is craftier. It wraps itself in the language of selflessness, presence, and enlightenment while secretly serving the same old egoic agenda. The seventh shocking truth is this. After a genuine glimpse of awakening, the ego will often try to co-opt the experience, claiming it as its own achievement and creating a new enlightened identity that may be even more rigid and limiting than the old one. I am an awakened being. It proudly proclaims, I have transcended the ego. I am more spiritual than those unenlightened masses. And with these thoughts, the prison walls go up again, perhaps more subtly than before, but no less confining. This spiritual ego is remarkably resourceful. It can turn even the most profound insights into new forms of self-aggrandizement. It can wear the mask of humility while secretly believing in its own superiority. It can espouse oneness and interconnection while treating others as less evolved. I've seen this happen countless times. A person has a genuine awakening experience, a true taste of the void beyond the separate self, but then quickly reconstructs a new self-image around that experience. I'm no longer identified with my ego, they say, not realizing that this very statement is the ego talking. It's rather like what happens when a revolutionary movement overthrows a dictator only to become the new dictatorship. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The faces change, but the fundamental structure of control and separation remains intact. So, how does one navigate this treacherous terrain? How does one avoid trading an ordinary ego for a spiritual one? Well, the first step is simply to be aware of this tendency, to watch for the subtle ways in which awakening experiences can be co-opted by the ego's need for specialness and superiority. To notice when I've transcended the ego becomes just another egoic claim. But beyond that, there's a more radical approach, which is to question the very notion of spiritual progress itself, to see how the whole model of development of becoming more enlightened over time might itself be a sophisticated form of ego preservation. What if awakening isn't about becoming a better, more evolved version of yourself? What if it's about the collapse of the entire project of self-improvement? What if it's not about adding spiritual qualities to your existing identity, but about recognizing that what you are is prior to all identities, all qualities, all attainments? This is what the Zen tradition points to with its emphasis on original face or Buddha nature. Your true nature isn't something to be cultivated or developed. It's what's already here prior to all cultivation and development. The sun doesn't practice shining. It's its nature to shine. In the same way, your fundamental nature doesn't need improvement. It only needs recognition. So rather than trying to become an enlightened person, which is just the ego's way of preserving itself in a new spiritual guise, what if you question the very existence of the separate person who could become anything at all? What if instead of seeking experiences that confirm your specialness, you look directly at the one who seeks, the one who claims experiences as mine? This is the radical invitation of non-duality, not to perfect the self, but to see through it entirely, not to accumulate spiritual experiences, but to question who or what it is that experiences, not to become enlightened, but to recognize the enlightenment that's already the case when the imagined self is seen for what it is, a useful fiction, a process rather than a thing, a verb rather than a noun. The void after awakening isn't something the ego attains. It's what remains when the illusion of a separate ego is seen through. And the freedom of this void isn't the property of a new improved spiritual self. It's the natural expression of what you've always been prior to all selves, all identities, all becoming. Now, here's something that runs completely counter to our expectations about spiritual awakening. The most liberating realization might not be some extraordinary mind-blowing experience, but rather the recognition that no special experience is needed. We've been conditioned to seek peak experiences dramatic insights, altered states of consciousness. We imagine that enlightenment must involve fireworks, angels singing, the heavens opening up, and certainly such experiences can occur along the path, but they're not the point. And mistaking them for the point can actually prevent the deepest recognition from occurring. The eighth shocking truth is this: true liberation comes not from having special experiences, but from recognizing the inherent freedom and completeness of ordinary experience of this just as it is. You know, there's a wonderful story about the great Zen master Ikkyu. A man came to him asking for instruction, expecting to be given some profound spiritual technique. Instead, Ikkyu asked him, "Have you finished your breakfast?" The man said, "Yes." "Then wash your bowl," replied Ikkyu. That was the entire teaching. What was Ikkyu pointing to is simply this: enlightenment isn't found outside your everyday activities. It's found in complete presence with whatever you're doing, no matter how mundane. Washing a bowl can be just as enlightened an activity as sitting in meditation for 20 years in a Himalayan cave. The great paradox here is that as long as you're seeking some special experience that will finally make you free, you are overlooking the freedom that's already here. It's like the fish swimming desperately in search of water, not realizing that water is what it's swimming in. This doesn't mean that meditative practices or spiritual disciplines have no value. They do, but their true value isn't in producing special states or experiences. It's in pointing to the inherent spaciousness and clarity that's already present in all experience. They're not techniques for escaping the ordinary world, but for discovering the extraordinary nature of the ordinary. Think of it this way: when you watch a movie, you might become completely absorbed in the story, identifying with the characters, feeling their emotions, forgetting that you're watching images on a screen. Spiritual practices are like momentarily stepping back and noticing the screen itself. Oh, it's just a movie. But then something interesting happens. You return to the movie, but now with a different relationship to it. You can enjoy it fully while also being aware of its nature as a play of light and shadow. You are simultaneously immersed and free. This is what the Zen tradition means by not one, not two. You're neither completely identified with experience, one with it, nor completely detached from it, two. You're engaged but not entangled, responsive but not reactive, participating fully in life while recognizing its dreamlike nature. And here's the beautiful thing: this recognition can occur in any moment, regardless of what's happening. You don't need perfect conditions or special circumstances. It can happen while you're stuck in traffic, washing the dishes, having a difficult conversation, or lying in bed with the flu. Any experience can be the doorway to recognizing the inherent freedom that's always already here. So if you've been seeking some final spectacular experience that will forever liberate you from suffering, perhaps it's time to question that very seeking. Perhaps liberation isn't found in some future experience, but in the direct recognition of the spacious awareness that's present in this very experience, whatever it may be. The void after awakening isn't a special state that comes and goes. It's the ever-present context of all states, all experiences. It's not something to attain, but something to recognize. And the recognition can happen now, not when conditions are perfect, not when you've finally purified your mind or transcended your ego, but right here, right now, in the midst of this imperfect, messy, beautiful human life. One of the most bewildering aspects of awakening is discovering that it doesn't exempt you from the drama of human existence. There's often an expectation, you see, that enlightenment is some sort of cosmic graduation, that once you've got it, you'll move beyond the messiness of human life into some pristine realm of perpetual peace. But here's the ninth shocking truth: awakening doesn't end the cosmic play. It simply changes your relationship to it. The drama continues, but you're no longer merely a character trapped within it. You're simultaneously the character, the playwright, the stage, and the aware space in which it all unfolds. This is often a source of confusion for spiritual seekers. If I'm really awake, they wonder, why do I still get angry? Why do I still feel fear? Why do I still make mistakes? They imagine that awakening should eliminate all the messy bits of being human, leaving only the pure, the perfect, the transcendent. But this expectation completely misses the point of awakening. The point isn't to escape the human condition, but to fully embrace it from a place of greater spaciousness and wisdom. Not to stop being human, but to be more completely, more authentically human, which includes all the passions, quirks, and limitations that come with this particular form. Consider this. A great actor doesn't stop acting when they master their craft. On the contrary, their mastery allows them to inhabit their roles more fully, more convincingly, with greater range and nuance. In the same way, awakening doesn't mean you stop playing your role in the cosmic drama. It means you play it with greater presence, authenticity, and freedom. You know, there's a beautiful metaphor in Hinduism, the concept of Leela, or divine play. The idea is that the entire cosmos is a kind of dramatic performance that God puts on for God's own delight. God plays all the roles, from the villain to the hero, the beggar to the king, forgetting its true nature in order to fully experience the drama from every possible perspective. Awakening, in this view, doesn't mean the play stops. It just means that in the midst of playing your particular role, you remember that you're also the one who's playing all the other roles. You recognize that beneath the mask of your specific character lies the face of the one cosmic actor. This recognition brings an incredible lightness to living. You can take your role seriously without being weighed down by it. You can care passionately about outcomes without being attached to them. You can experience the full range of human emotions without being defined or limited by them. And here's something fascinating. This freedom often allows you to play your role more effectively, not less. When you're not constrained by fear, by the need to control outcomes, by rigid ideas of who you are and what you're capable of, your natural responsiveness and creativity can flow more freely. You become more spontaneous, more authentic, more alive. I've noticed that some of the most awakened beings I've met don't fit our stereotypes of spiritual masters at all. They don't float around in perpetual bliss, dispensing platitudes from on high. They're earthy, passionate, sometimes outrageous, fully engaged with life in all its messiness. Their awakening hasn't removed them from the human drama. It's allowed them to participate in it more fully, with greater freedom and joy. So if you've had glimpses of awakening and you're wondering why life hasn't suddenly become perfect, why you still face challenges, feel emotions, make mistakes, remember the play continues. But now you have the opportunity to engage with it from a place of greater freedom and clarity, not as a character desperately trying to control the plot, but as the aware space in which the entire drama unfolds. The void after awakening isn't an escape from life. It's the context that allows life to be lived more fully, more freely, more authentically. It's not the end of the cosmic play, but the recognition of its true nature as a play, serious and significant, yes, but also light and joyful and endlessly creative. Now, as we come to the culmination of our journey together, it's time to unveil the most shocking truth of all about the void after awakening. And I warn you, this may be difficult to hear because it completely upends our most cherished spiritual assumptions. Here it is. The void that follows awakening, that apparent emptiness, that groundless ground, that spacious awareness, is precisely what you've been seeking all along. Not as a means to an end, not as a stepping stone to something better, but as the very thing itself. You see, we've been conditioned to view the spiritual path as a journey from here to there, from ignorance to enlightenment, from suffering to bliss. We imagine that if we practice diligently enough, if we purify ourselves sufficiently, we'll eventually arrive at some glorious destination where all our spiritual yearnings will be fulfilled. But what if the destination isn't what we thought? What if instead of a state of perpetual ecstasy of cosmic fireworks and divine rapture, what awaits us is nothing? Nothing in the sense of nothing, no graspable content, no special experience that the separate self can claim as its attainment. Just this ordinary, ever-present awareness that's already here, already free, already complete. This is the great cosmic joke. You see, after all that seeking, all that striving, all that spiritual effort, what do you find? You find that what you are, what you've always been, is not a thing at all, but the open, aware space in which all things appear. Not a separate entity on a journey to enlightenment, but the enlightened context in which all journeys unfold. And this nothing, this void, this groundless ground, far from being a disappointment, is actually the source of the profoundest freedom, the deepest peace, the most authentic joy. Not because it gives you something you lacked, but because it reveals that you never lacked anything in the first place. Think about it this way. What if freedom isn't found in getting what you want, but in discovering that you're already free, regardless of what comes and goes in experience? What if peace isn't a special state to be achieved, but the natural condition of awareness when it's not fighting against what is? What if joy isn't dependent on circumstances being a certain way, but is the natural expression of being, when it's not constrained by the imagined boundaries of a separate self? This is what the great spiritual traditions have been pointing to all along, though often in language that's easily misunderstood. When Buddhism speaks of emptiness, it's not describing a nihilistic void, but the empty, open nature of awareness that allows all things to be. When Hinduism speaks of the self, it's not referring to a cosmic superego, but to the boundless awareness that is our true nature, beyond all egoic identification. When Christianity speaks of the kingdom of heaven, it's pointing to the ever-present reality that's at hand, not in some future time or distant place, but here and now, when the veils of separation fall away. The shocking truth is that what you're seeking is what's seeking. The awareness reading these words right now, the consciousness that's present, regardless of what thoughts, feelings, or perceptions arise, this is it. Not something to attain, but something to recognize. Not a future state, but the ever-present reality in which all states come and go. And here's the most liberating part. You don't have to do anything to be what you are. You don't have to change, improve, or purify yourself. You don't have to have special experiences or insights. You don't have to sit in meditation for 20 years, or study ancient texts, or find the perfect teacher. All you have to do is stop overlooking the obvious. Stop seeking what was never lost. Stop trying to become what you already are. The void after awakening isn't something new that appears. It's the recognition of what's been here all along, hidden in plain sight. It's not an attainment, but a coming home to your true nature. It's not an addition to what you are, but a recognition of what you've always been. This boundless, beginningless, endless awareness. That is the very context of all experience. So if you've been seeking enlightenment, if you've been on the spiritual path for years or decades, hoping to arrive at some exalted state, I invite you to consider a radical possibility. What if you're already there? What if the destination you've been seeking is actually the ground you've been standing on all along? The void isn't waiting for you in some future moment of enlightenment. It's here now as the aware space in which these words appear, in which thoughts arise, in which sensations and emotions come and go. Not something to achieve, but something to recognize. Not something to become, but what you already are. And in this recognition, there's a freedom and a peace that's not dependent on any circumstance, any experience, any state. A freedom that's intrinsic to your very nature as awareness. A peace that passes understanding because it's prior to the mind that seeks to understand. A joy that's not the opposite of sorrow, but the ground in which both joy and sorrow arise and pass away. This is the shocking truth about the void after awakening. It's not a void of emptiness and despair, but a void of infinite potential and freedom. Not an absence, but a presence so complete, so all-encompassing that no thing can define or limit it. Not a state that comes and goes, but the stateless state that's always already here, always already free, always already complete. And this truth isn't shocking because it's complex or difficult to understand. It's shocking because it's so simple, so obvious, so immediate that we've been overlooking it our entire lives. It's shocking because it reveals that the treasure we've been seeking was never lost, that the home we've been journeying toward is where we've been all along. So here at the end of our journey together, I invite you to stop, to be still, to look within, not for something special or extraordinary, but for the ordinary, everyday awareness that's reading these words right now. This is it. This is what you've been seeking. This is the void that's been here all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized as your very own true nature. As our time together draws to a close, I'd like to leave you with a few final thoughts about this void we've been exploring, this apparent emptiness that follows awakening, this groundless ground that is our true nature. You know, it's curious how we humans tend to fear emptiness, to run from it, to fill it with noise and activity and endless seeking. We treat the void as an enemy to be conquered, a problem to be solved, a deficiency to be remedied, and in doing so, we miss the profound gift that it offers, because this void, this emptiness, this groundless ground, it's not a barren wasteland, but a field of infinite possibility. It's not an abyss to be feared, but the open sky of your own awareness. It's not nothing in the sense of a negation, but nothing in the sense that it's no particular thing and thus can accommodate all things. The Taoists understood this when they spoke of the usefulness of emptiness. 30 spokes converge on a hub, but it's the empty space that makes the wheel useful, says the Tao Te Ching. Clay is shaped into vessels, but it's the empty space that makes them useful. Doors and windows are cut into walls, but it's the empty spaces that make a house livable. In the same way, it's the emptiness at your core, the spacious awareness that you are, that makes you truly alive, truly responsive, truly free. Not because it's something separate from life, but because it's the very context in which life unfolds, the canvas on which life paints its endless forms. So as you move forward from here, I invite you to make friends with this void, to recognize it not as an enemy to be conquered or a lack to be filled, but as your own true nature, boundless, beginningless, endless. To see that it's not opposed to form, but is the very space in which all forms arise and pass away. And in this recognition, there's a profound ease, a deep rest, a coming home to what you've always been. Not an escape from life, but a full, fearless engagement with it. Not a withdrawal from the world, but a clear-eyed participation in it, free from the constrictions of a separate self. Remember, the void after awakening isn't a consolation prize. It's the main event. It's not what you settle for when enlightenment fails to meet your expectations. It's what enlightenment has been pointing to all along. Not an attainment, but a recognition. Not a destination, but the ground beneath your feet. So, I leave you with this simple invitation. Stop seeking what was never lost. Stop trying to become what you already are. Stop overlooking the obvious. This clear, spacious awareness that's present right now. Reading these words. This is it. This is what you've been seeking. This is the void that's been here all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized as your very own true nature. And in this recognition, there's a freedom that no experience can give and no experience can take away. A peace that's not the opposite of conflict, but the ground in which both peace and conflict arise and pass away. A love that's not a feeling that comes and goes, but the very nature of awareness itself. Boundless, all-encompassing, ever-present. So here you are, just as you've always been, free, complete, at home in the void that is your true nature. The journey ends where it began, in the recognition that there was never anywhere to go, never anything to become, never anything to attain. Just now, just as you are.